Hey guys, before we get into the episode, I just wanted to take a second to talk to you about 12 Strides and 12 Group Norms for Liberty and Recovery. This is a book by former guest of the show, Asher Azzo. And what it is a deep dive into libertarianism and 12-step philosophy. Not only do you get to learn about how to apply those principles to your very own life, but you also get to see what it looked like for the recovery community going through lockdowns and the COVID hysteria. Also included at the end of the book is a fictional story about a man in recovery searching for his own son. You can find this book on Amazon, paperback, or it's also available on Kindle. I will include the link to the book in the show notes page for this episode, so please go check it out. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Clean Libertarian Podcast. And my apologies that I have not had anything out to y'all in a while. Bad news, it's probably going to be like that. Once upon a time, I had adequate free time to really carve out on Saturday evenings and, be on the lookout throughout the week for new guests to bring on the show. But just going to be honest, man, it's really tough right now. Doing the things that I'm doing for Out of Harm's Way, the needle exchange, and doing that work, obviously takes precedence. We've been running for a little over 2 months, and we just celebrated 40 overdose reversals as a result of our kids. So, the work that I'm doing over there, that we are doing, it's not just me. There's some amazing people that have hopped on board to help make this thing happen. The work that we're doing over there is really important. But that's not to say that, this isn't a dead deal. I'm still going to absolutely have content. It just might not be every single week, like it had been. But I will be revisiting this often and as much as possible. I'll tell you, the real shitty thing is that, I've really wanted to start bringing on more harm reduction people. But typically that crowd doesn't like individuals, who express libertarian ideals and philosophy. And I don't think it's because they have a nuanced understanding, mind you. I think that a lot of them have had shitty run-ins with libertarian leaning people online, or, some fucking boomer red hat, that was like, oh, I'm libertarian, but, have really shitty takes after that. And so, I can't fault them. It's a little bit of a barrier, but I'm hoping to, the longer that we stay in and that Out of Harm's Way continues to do the work and see through the mission, that, that I can hopefully change some perspectives, and bring a little bit of nuance there to some individuals who might not have heard it otherwise. So anyways, that's the lowdown. That's kind of where I've been at, what I've been up to. But I got a great conversation in store for y'all today. This is Ash. Ash is making his return to the show. Man, we started out talking about, some of the finer points of his book. We also talked about kind of some of the issues that he's having with the publisher, which, man, if you or anybody else that has any influence with Champion Books or, being libertarian at large, let them get back to Ash. It's kind of fucked up, man. That man poured his heart and soul into making that book reality, and he can't even get anybody to hit him back. But anyways, I'll let him talk about that. We also got into current events and also just we kind of did what we do best, and that is just ramble and go through some topics. But it's always a pleasure. I love this man very much. He's part of my recovery family, and I am the better for it. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on Ash. All right, and I'm here with Ash, and I had to go ahead and hit record because we're getting into some heavy shit. But first, Ash, how are you doing, sir?
I am doing fantastic. I am feeling absolutely amazing. Fatherhood is a absolute blessing. I am also more tired than I've ever been in my entire life. And it's just this constant draining tiredness, exhaustion, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I don't, I had a son 9 months ago. He's happy, he's healthy. My wife is happy and healthy. Uh, of course, the two of us, we are extremely sleep deprived. But the kid's healthy, so what can I complain about? And I feel absolutely amazing, even when I physically, don't. It doesn't quite match up, So
Yeah. Yeah, man. That that initial, I mean, the funny thing is like before I became a parent, I remember everybody like the going, saying is like, "Oh, you're not going to know what sleep is."
yeah,
And the gravity of that doesn't set in until about 2 to 3 months in. And you're like, "Oh god. Yeah, this is a new way of life now."
yeah. I mean, to be fair, my wife takes the brunt of it. She will get up every few hours and like feed him and nurse him and everything until he's able to go back to sleep. We're slowly making it so that way, eating is not a prerequisite for going to sleep, comfortably or whatever. We don't want our son to be in a food coma every time he has to go to bed, but
Right.
we're working on it. We'll see how it goes. Um, but new parents, first time, and just couldn't be happier. We're very blessed. We were able to go on vacation a few weeks ago and took him out to the beach and dipped his toes in the Atlantic Ocean, and we were able to bring our family dog, which is amazing because anytime we've ever gone out of town, we have to like ask somebody to dog sit for us. So to be able to actually take our dog with us was um, just amazing to have the whole family there. So
Yeah. That's huge, man. Huge.
yeah,
And two wonderful people became parents, man. And I can't wait to see what all those moments that pop up in your life and all those benchmarks, man, along the way. That's the good shit.
yeah, all a gift of recovery. My wife and I are both in recovery, and this either wouldn't be happening or it would be a complete train wreck if we were both still, drinking and using and all that stuff. So,
Yeah,
recovery has been very, very kind to the both of us. So,
for sure, man. So, where do you want to start at? Do you want to pick up on the conversation we were having before, or circle back around to that? You want to start on the book? Like, what do you want to do?
well, I do want to talk about the book, and I want to talk a bit about the publisher. But you had said you wanted to talk a little bit about. We were having a conversation about. I have this sense of impending doom. Like I'm totally trying to be like white pilled for my kid as much as possible. Totally trying to be white pilled for my kid and my family as much as possible and everything like that. But I just have this overarching sense of doom going on. So in my household, we don't watch regular news. I always put on the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and I'm always impressed with how he's able to like stay positive and everything like that. And I try to emulate that for my family and for other people that I talk to about this liberty stuff and economics and all that jazz. But I mean, I tell you what, it is becoming more and more difficult, because it's funny if I take a look at everything going on in the world with the economy tanking and basically soon to be hyperinflation and all this other stuff and everything like that, it starts to make sense when I sit there and I'm like, oh, this is intentional, this is deliberate, they are trying to ruin everything, so everyone's got to rely on the system and whatever global new world order basically comes out of it. And the catalyst for that was COVID and the lockdowns and all of that stuff. I mean, the World Economic Forum, they wrote a book about it and they actually called the damn thing the Great Reset. And it's hysterical because if you even mention that, you're some, wide-eyed conspiracy theorist, and like they wrote a damn book about it, for crying out loud.
Right.
So I just I'm doing everything I can to just like kind of stay optimistic because like I've got a kid. If I can't be optimistic for my kid, then who the hell is gonna be? If
Right.
I'm a sad ass, he's gonna pick up on that, and then he's gonna grow up to be a sad ass, and I don't want that. so I'm trying to. I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
I don't know,
You
man.
know,
I think you look at if we look at the broad, let's look at like the timeline of human history. Governments, especially corrupt, tyrannical governments, have risen and fallen, and I think humanity is. I mean, it's not in a good spot right now, but we've been in a lot worse spots, you
sure,
know.
yeah,
And I don't know, man. I think even in with the event, like the human spirit marches on, man, and and life will find a way. I think the only way that that doesn't happen is if everybody goes to turning keys and pushing buttons on a global scale. You know,
yeah, but that's the thing about it is that we are so close to that right now. I
yeah,
mean, it's there's the war with Russia is dying down, and like I had said this at the a few dad roundtables ago, where I was just like, as far as I'm concerned, I think the United States pretty much already is at war with Russia. And, NATO is already. I mean, they've been declared an enemy of Russia.
yeah,
And now the whole Taiwan thing is starting to ramp up and everything like that. It's like, I mean, I don't think that the world, the Davos crowd, the World Economic Forum crowd, I don't think that their plan will succeed because economically it's not viable, nor are human beings a bunch of ants. We have free will. We don't just all necessarily line up and listen to whoever it is that says that they're in charge, like especially us libertarians and ANCAPs and stuff like that.
yeah,
um, but so one day the Soviet Union just fell, and that was the probably the other major totalitarian regime in the past like 150 years. The Soviet Union started, in the first part of the 20th century, and it didn't make it to the end of the 20th century. So less than 100 years, you had the most totalitarian, brutal regime in human history. And that's not to say that Hitler and the Nazis weren't evil. Of course they are. But I'm just saying, 200 million people dead, between China and the USSR. And then one day it just collapses, and their entire empire, if you will, consisted of about a third of the globe. Now we're talking about an empire, with the current like globalist, regime or whatever is 2-3 times that size, 4 times that size.
yeah,
So even though it took 80 years for it to collapse with the Soviet Union, it did collapse. My fear is that you know what's going into motion now isn't going to collapse for generations, and I'm talking like our great 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 grandchildren. We're going to have entire generations in our family lines that aren't even going to know liberty. That's
yeah,
that's my fear. That's the fear. That's what I don't want to see happen. And I'm just doing my part of it, doing what I can. So, hey, I wrote the 12 strides and the 12 group norms.
there it is. There it
That's
is, man. I mean, but that is 100% what it's all about is finding that thing that you're good at and that you're passionate about and using that to illuminate the world around you.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, absolutely. I did. That's been my piece, and of course I'm engaged with the Libertarian Party, and I have not jumped ship yet, despite the craziness that's coming out of certain state affiliates. I'm definitely between the Sober Caucus and the Mises Caucus. Like those are the two groups that I do the most work with within the LP. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I even approve of some of the edgier messaging. And it's not even necessarily because I may or may not disagree with it. It's got more to do with I just understand the optics of the situation and the way like normal people look at stuff like that. But I mean, I'm staying on the ship. I'm staying on the ship for sure because you're not going to catch me voting for, the Democrats or the Republicans or anything like that. It's going to be, whoever my local, big L candidates are,
For
um,
sure.
and it's going to be me doing whatever groundwork I can do in the trenches kind of work that I can do for that kind of thing. But anyways, no, my talent was writing a book, and so I wrote the 12 strides and the 12 norms for liberty and recovery. And I've got a copy sitting here, and wouldn't you know it, I turn to the back and I start reading in this 2-part book. Author Asher Azo walks us through the 12 strides and 12 norms of both recovery and our place in the liberty movement. This work will guise you. That's a typo there. There's a typo on the back cover of the book. So this is something I wanted to talk about. For those of you out there that are interested in my book, The 12 Strides and 12 Norms, it is available on Amazon. You can get it in e-reader format, either Kindle or whatever other reader you have, or you can buy a paper copy. And the paper copy, let's see here. I'd love to read something out of this. Let me just flip a few pages. Oh, look, there's no page numbers. And there's typos in there too. So I'm being facetious here. I was working with Champion Books, and I had an editor I was working with. I won't say his name. And any of the typos that are in here, like maybe I handed the original script that way to the publisher, and I'd imagine the editors would go through it and everything like that. But I mean, there's typos all throughout the book. There's missing page numbers. Apparently, if you get the e-reader version, you don't have to worry about that because it's got the pages set up for the e-reader. But I mean, a week after it got published, my main editor and the sole point of contact I had with Champion Books, he resigned from the company, and I have barely heard anything since. I've sent probably about a dozen emails, gotten 1 or 2 back from some anonymous person within whoever it is that's answering the email over with Champion Books. But they haven't done any promotional stuff for me, either on social media or on their website. And Champion Books is actually a subdivision of Being Libertarian, the famous Being Libertarian page on Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media stuff. They write articles constantly. Lately, I think most of what they've been doing is just posting memes and everything, but I haven't even had an opportunity to go through the entire book. And I haven't gotten 100%. I haven't gotten feedback from anyone that has either at this point. Makes it even tougher because I did write the book anonymously. So, what recourses do I really have? I risk exposing myself, possibly getting in trouble with my work, possibly getting doxxed, and then myself, my new kid, and my wife are, down to one income instead of 2 incomes.
Yeah.
And bills be expensive with hyperinflation. So
yeah. Yep.
So I don't even know if I'm going to be getting a commission or any payment from the book or anything like that. But I mean, I didn't write it to make a profit or any of that sort of stuff. I wrote it because I felt it was something that needed to be said.
Yeah.
So the short version of the 12 strides. The 12 strides are basically a fill-in for the 12 steps. The 12 norms are the 12 traditions. And there's a few major sections in here, and I'll just kind of gloss over some of it. Like I said, I do encourage you to go ahead and order, a copy off of Amazon. And even if the money does go to Champion Books, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's still, what I wrote is what I wrote, and I wrote it for a reason. And I'm hoping it gets around enough. And the main point is that it changes some lives and it helps some people. First I start by talking about, where recovery culture has sort of been infiltrated in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And I talk about, the influence of big pharma and the war on drugs predominantly, but then there's some of the culture war stuff that's also even infiltrated in it, which isn't to bash anybody or any particular group of people or anything like that. But it's like, the primary purpose is to not use drugs. The primary purpose is to, not drink alcohol. The primary purpose is to try to help other people sort their lives out so they don't die. Like, can we worry about all the other stuff at some other point? Like, there's a million other forums out there to get across whatever, cultural, socio-political issue out there. Like, can we at least just have these spaces specifically for people that are like on the verge of like death, and like afterwards, like if you want to invite them out to some other thing, like maybe that makes sense. Like, I don't walk into a 12-step meeting and start preaching libertarianism, which is funny because in this book, what I've identified is how much overlap there actually is between the 12-step philosophy and libertarian philosophy. So I go through the strides, which are the steps. And then in, part 2, the solution for the communities, I start talking about the group norms, which are basically the traditions. And I think I've talked about this a few different times through various episodes with you. Bill Wilson, when he was writing the 12 traditions, he basically, he didn't want to do it. I get the feeling, like from what I know, historically speaking, I don't think he wanted to do it. I think he had sort of patchwork solutions from different AA groups that would write him from all over the country. And, every time that they proposed a problem, he would propose a solution. And eventually it just got to the point where it was so overwhelming that, he came up with the 12 traditions to help manage the groups. And what are the 12 traditions when somebody actually reads through them? Well, it's basically a constitution of sorts. And with the way the group is set up, I mean, it's a democratic constitutional republic. That's the way the groups are set up. You have the highest level of liberty with the individual, and then at the group level, the actual meetings themselves. And then as you get your way up to either the area level or the intergroup level or the regional level, like power diminishes as you go up. Yeah. So it's it's set up in a way where it has as little restriction as possible. And even then, it still couldn't be claimed to be a government anyways, because there's no monopoly on force. Anyone that doesn't want to participate, you can always just leave and start your own thing. Right. And hell, I've done that back in the day. I had meetings. There were meetings, a lot of meetings around me, and none of them fit my schedule. And I was working in the restaurant biz back then. This was like 2010, 2011. I had just gotten out of jail. And, I had 2.5 years clean. I was going back to school. I was working in the restaurant. I maybe slept 3 hours a night. I drank way more energy drinks than I probably should have. And, one night, I'm with a buddy of mine who's also in recovery, and I'm like, I need to get to a meeting. Like, I don't care where I have to go. I'll go to, a city that's an hour or two away just to go to like a meeting at 2 a.m. And he was like, well, dude, why don't you just start your own meeting? And so what I did, that's what I did. And, for the first few months, it was only a handful of people. But after 6 months, we had people driving from like hours away to get to this meeting to see like, oh, there's a midnight smoking meeting for young people Wednesday night and on a weekend and like stuff like that. And so like we had like 40 people filling the back of this like dingy internet cafe. It was insane.
Fuck yeah, dude. Those are the best kind of meetings too. Like ones that like grow like that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, because you got I don't know, man. We have one locally that started out real small, and then it just blew up, man. Once the halfway houses in an area get in on board and they're all meeting there, you got a lit fucking meeting.
Oh hell yeah. We've got that going on right now. So like one of my home groups on Thursday night, was in a metropolitan area, and they had like a vaccine mandate to be able to go anywhere in the city. Like you had to show your vaccine card to go to the meeting. And there were a bunch of us that were just like, fuck that. We're not doing that. And so we started a meeting in another, jurisdiction where there was no mandate for any of that sort of stuff. And even if there was, we would have met somewhere on private property. But we've been doing that ever since. So we're meeting in this new location. It's an unlisted meeting. And like, it's funny. So get this. We started an unlisted meeting during the height of the lockdowns. And everyone loved it, including all the people that eventually when they did get vaccinated, when they did get their vax cards, and they were willing to display that to be able to go to a meeting, which I don't even know how many newcomers that probably fucked over.
Yeah.
They went to, they were like, okay, well, when are the rest of you guys going to be coming back? And we were just sort of like, well, we're not, like we have a, problem with this. Like, that's not the way that this fellowship is supposed to run. And I go back to this idea of like outside issues once again.
Yeah.
So we started our meeting. We started getting complaints from other people like, well, how are you going to reach out to the newcomer? How are you going to, we miss you guys. We really wish you'd come back, blah, 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 acting like we're the weird ones. We're the ones that aren't normal or anything like that. Guess what? Not only are we up to like 20, 25 people when we started with like maybe 10 or less. But now we've actually started a step study to take place before the meeting and stuff like that. And last Thursday, I mean, we had like 25 people like crammed into this tiny ass room just to, like about a dozen or so to do steps beforehand. And then like the rest of them for the meeting afterwards. And like, we're attracting newcomers and people from halfway houses and like, people, I know people that I'm meeting them for the first time in the rooms. They got sober or clean going to meetings on Zoom. Which is just absolutely insane to me, and God bless them. And that's amazing. I'm so happy but that's all stuff that's happening in spite of the lockdowns.
That's it.
That's all happening in spite of the restrictions or the safety measures or any of that sort of stuff. I go back to, when you talk about Alcoholics Anonymous starting in 1935, what major event impacted alcoholics in the decade or so prior to 1935? Oh yeah, that's right, prohibition. So AA is this thing that evolved of course in response to a disease, but also in response to the fact that like so many things in the social sphere were just so horribly affected by government policy.
Right.
You had people drinking, gin made in bathtubs, and like you had like organized crime. Like, I mean, think about all the ways that people are like killing each other over drugs and fentanyl and everything today or whatever. You had all of that stuff going on just simply for alcohol. So yes, this severely impacted the alcoholic, and a bunch of people, latched on to Bill's idea after he met Bob and Ebby and managed to like stay sober for a while. And like all of this stuff almost never fucking happened. So anyways, I talk about the group norms. I do talk about norm number 7, which is, the only, we're self-supporting and everything like that. And I apply that more on like a personal level and everything. I talk about Bill Wilson's history with anarchism and stuff like that. And then I have a note to the families, which directly addresses like codependency and stuff. So part 3 is a fictional story. And this was easily my favorite part of the book to read. Or, to write actually. So let me rephrase that. This is a post-apocalyptic story, of a guy who's clean, and every single person that's in the story is based on somebody I know from my life, and so he talks about his recovery network, and he's out there and he's looking for his son because the courts took his son, because he refused to get vaccinated, and his wife died from a vaccine injury. And what this really resulted out of is I had one chapter that I began where like an AA meeting or an NA meeting is getting raided by a SWAT team for refusing to follow the COVID lockdowns. And, my wife was like, that's really dark. That's really messed up. You should continue that. And so I did. And, I wrote about a guy who lost his wife to the vaccine, and, his son was taken by the courts. Like, think about if the whole, COVID lockdowns, and I say this with all due respect to the parts of the country that are still facing like, mandates and all this other stuff. I know it's eased up in a lot of places, but it hasn't eased up everywhere. And so I definitely feel for those of you out there in the country that are still struggling with this stuff, and move to a free part of the country if you can. If not, stay and fight and do whatever you can to within legal means to try to get around the system because it's unjust and it's fascist. But anyways, I just could you imagine if things hadn't happened the way they happened?
Mm.
Like, could you imagine if things just went more authoritarian? Could you imagine if they had instituted, COVID checkpoints, like the same way they do sobriety checkpoints and stuff like that, like making sure your Vax card is up to date? Have you had your 12th booster yet? Like, oh, you haven't? Oh, okay. Well, you're not allowed to drive your car anymore. And wouldn't you know it, some of the stuff with this, uh, um, environmentalism, rabid environmentalism, because believe it or not, I actually care about the environment. I just think that term's been hijacked at this point. I mean, all this carbon reduction stuff,
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
these days they're going to be able to shut down your EV because you've gone over your carbon footprint limit.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Things like
like,
that.
I think you and I are probably both in the same boat on that one because it's like, bro, I love the outdoors. I
Oh yeah.
love going fishing. Let me tell you, so I live in Oklahoma City, right?
Mhm.
All the waterways around here are fucking trash. And that's because a lot of sewage runoff,
Mhm.
just pollution. There's trash everywhere. It looks like shit. That is not ideal for for the environment.
No.
However, I'm also not cool with the Gestapo being able to fucking put a boot in your ass because like you said, you charged your car for an hour longer this month than you should have,
Yeah.
or your carbon footprint is going. So I mean, I feel like just like everything else in life, there's a balance, but yeah, dude.
Absolutely. I think the market, and it was the funniest thing to me too, is because like as the narrative was shifting from COVID, vaccine, 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 vaccine. Well, let me throw masks in there in the middle between those two. And then for to see it go from that to Ukraine and Russia, as well as the carbon footprint, like environmentalism stuff. Like I just started laughing when people started when people within our circle started saying, oh, they're going to use all the COVID regime stuff to try to do like this global warming. They don't even say global warming, climate change stuff. And I hope saying those words doesn't get your podcast flagged with whatever. But whether they, so I mean, look, I mean, just even mentioning words like gets you flagged by the authoritarian, like dystopian, fascist, fucking wrong think police. So I mean, when they said that, like I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the 80s. I grew up in the 90s, and I remember believing that acid rain and quicksand was going to kill everybody. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like this is like the third time I think in my lifetime they've like gone severe super environmentalist. First it was like acid rain's going to kill us all, and that was like the early 90s. And like I was a fan of like the Highlander movies growing up, and I think the plot of the second one was that acid rain had like destroyed most of the earth or something. And then like global warming was going to be a thing, and then they were like, oh no, we were wrong about that, it's going to be global cooling. Now they don't really want to say whether it's going to get hotter or get colder, so now they just have climate change as like a catch-all phrase for all of this shit. And it's just like I care about the environment. I want the environment to like I have a kid. I want the planet to be a wonderful place for my kid. But you cannot convince me that that's going to happen in any other type of environment than a free market, because I'll give you an example. So like there was a pre-pandemic, I think it was United Airlines. I think it was United Airlines. There was a viral video of like they oversold the flight, and there was a viral video of like this doctor, this heart surgeon or something like that, refused to give up his seat, but he had won the lottery for the person that was going to give up his seat because they overbooked this flight. And he was like, I've got a surgery to perform or something the next day. And so there's a viral video of this guy getting the shit kicked out of him by TSA and getting dragged off of this flight, and he's like protesting it as it's all happening and everything. and when the full story came out and everything like that, and people saw this video, United's stock dropped like a rock over the course of the next week. And that is something no piece of government regulation, no matter how authoritarian in scope, can do. So, I mean, if you want to save the environment, I think the free market's the way to do it, where you convince people that this is actually something that they want, and you attach it to the chain of supply and demand. But I mean, the other piece to it is this: is like, if you actually care about the environment and the carbon footprint, there's one big energy source that is pretty much carbon neutral and could provide us all of the clean energy we need for generations and generations and generations, and they won't touch it. That's a part of the book too.
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear. Yep. I mean, if we just simply went instead, it's funny because if we were ever actually attacked with an EMP or something like that, we are actually in the most precarious spot possible because of lobbying of big oil, natural gas, coal, all those major industries that have basically bought the government and use it as a strong arm. Like the whole energy industrial complex has left us in the worst place possible, because we have a handful. I don't know how many of them there are across the United States. I did some research on this for the book and for the fictional story aspect of it. But we have a bunch of nuclear power plants in this country that are walkaway safe, and that's great. And that means that if anything ever happens, if all the workers never were able to touch anything for it, the grid were to go down, those reactors would be self-contained and self-sealing, and you wouldn't have any sort of background radiation leaking out into the environment outside of the plant. But then we have a whole bunch of nuclear power plants that are not walk-away safe whatsoever. And you're talking about the kind of situation where if those plants aren't maintained, they could, melt down and overload. And then you've got dozens of Chernobyls potentially all across the country.
Right.
That's a pretty out there scenario. Like, a lot of things would have to go wrong in order for that to happen. But when you compare that to Gen 3 and Gen 4 small modular nuclear reactors and stuff like that, if you have one of those for a town where it's not big enough that if something went wrong, it wouldn't actually do a whole hell of a lot of damage anyways, because of how tiny it is.
Yeah,
that's all being hamstrung because of regulation. And you had a lot of it is basically physical security measures. A lot of these nuclear power plants, I think all of them in the United States at least, they're all designed in a way to be able to repel a small army. Well, what small army is invading the United States in order to take over a nuclear power plant so they can do what? Sell uranium to Iran or some crap like that? It's ridiculous. But at the same time, these nuclear power plants, guess what? They're not really cost efficient because of that, because of having to keep up with all the regulatory hurdles and stuff like that. I mean, you have generations, the newest generations of nuclear reactors can run off of the nuclear waste that was produced in the middle of the 20th century. So all the, there's this video game franchise, you may know about it, Metal Gear Solid.
Oh yeah,
I'm a huge fan of the Metal Gear franchise, but the first game on the PlayStation, it was actually the third game in the series, but it's the first game on the PlayStation, and it's the one that really popularized it. And they have a bunch of this was back in the day when a lot of video games had some serious global life message type stuff, and one of the big themes behind it was this idea of nuclear deterrence and getting rid of all the nuclear weapons and everything. And I think Scott Horton actually just wrote a book about this. I'd love to get my hands on a copy of that whenever that comes out. Hotter Than the Sun, I believe. But in any event, this whole idea of there's parts of it where they talk about all the nuclear waste and stuff like that that's just sitting around or whatever, and seeping into the environment and everything, from dismantled nuclear missiles and other stuff like that. All of that crap, all of that material is actually usable for these small modular nuclear reactors. So we're at a place now where that stuff that's polluting the environment, and nuclear is probably the worst pollution you could possibly have that's man-made. The fact that stuff can actually be taken and then cleaned up and then used to create fresh energy that's clean, carbon neutral, like not polluting the environment and like able to allow like entire communities and people groups to like thrive globally.
Yeah.
And we're not doing that, that's
Yeah.
not a free market response. That's um, a fascist, corporatist, strong arm by government response. It's
Did you
so
watch
anyway.
the Chernobyl series on HBO?
I loved it. I loved it so
Dude,
much. I did watch it. Yeah.
I had no like, and I don't know how close to reality that is, but just seeing the level of incompetence that went into that disaster,
Hmm.
what caused it was
Yep.
eye opening. Because I don't know about you, but like when I was growing up, around here, it was kind of taught like, nuclear is dangerous because of this, and it was just like a nuclear reactor up and blew up just on its own, like unimpeded. But no, there was a lot of fail safes that got overstepped just to make that disaster happen.
Yeah, I mean the mini series on HBO is I couldn't tell you how much of it is accurate. I'm not a nuclear engineer. From what I have, I've talked to some people that do know a thing or two about it. But even just looking at that situation from 30,000 feet for a second, okay, so a nuclear power plant melts down and pollutes a large percentage of Europe. And if the Soviet Union hadn't sacrificed, what was it, 10,000, 100,000 of its own citizens to clean up the mess, it would have eventually like polluted the entire world and turned everything into an uninhabitable nuclear wasteland, blah, 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 blah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So that's your basic scenario here for a second. When everyone talks about Chernobyl melting down, what they don't talk about is that was a completely state controlled, state constructed facility as opposed to something being created in a free market.
Right.
So again, even with all of this nuclear fear that's out there, and they always throw Chernobyl out there as this anti-nuclear thing, and they fuel all these not in my backyard NIMBY types and everything, right?
Yeah.
And they always throw Chernobyl out there as the example. So it is basically the state and the corporatist fascist elements of the energy industrial complex, right? That are throwing out this example of a state-run, state-controlled nuclear power plant that melted down. If the Soviet Union didn't exist, if that town Pripyat and everything like that, if that was operating in a free market system with no government controls or anything like that, do you think that nuclear power plant would have been built to better standards that were better suited to like free market response? Because your stock tends to go down if your nuclear power plant like blows up. I mean, look at TEPCO in Japan with Fukushima and everything like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and I understand that Fukushima is nowhere near on the level that Chernobyl was, but like the quality of the nuclear power plant in Fukushima was so much higher than anything through that was at Chernobyl, and that's not just due to the fact that technology has advanced. Technology advances in spite of government impediment.
Right.
So anyways, Chernobyl always gets used as an example, and I grew up with the exact same thing. Nuclear is dangerous. I would feel scared if there was a nuclear power plant in my backyard, but it's an irrational fear to have,
Right.
especially with these smaller, newer nuclear power plants that are safe. I mean, and then of course one of my favorite video game franchises is the Fallout franchise. So like, of
Oh
course,
fuck yeah.
yeah, and funny enough, I may or may not have mentioned this to you before, but my favorite movie as a little kid, which I had no business watching, was Terminator 2. And
Nice.
so I saw that when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and then for the next 3 years, I had nightmares of like burning playgrounds and nuclear holocausts and stuff like that. So
I remember, man, back when that movie came out, that was the first rated R movie I ever saw in my life. We had a VHS that we rented. We rented the VHS player,
mhm.
okay, because we bought Betamax because we were fucking idiots. We bought Betamax in our household, and then obviously that went the way of the buffalo. So
Yeah,
before we could have our own VHS or VCR, we had to rent one, and then we rented Terminator 2. And I remember watching that, man, and that was just like, oh my God. I felt like such a badass. I don't remember how old I was, man.
That was
But
such a great movie. I watched it like 2 weeks ago, the special edition version.
did
Love that
you?
movie. Oh yeah, I love that movie. I still think that's probably the top 3 best action movies of all time.
Hmm.
I would say that Terminator 2, The Matrix, and let's see here, third action movie. I don't know, probably Die Hard. I'm a fan of the I guess you would call them classics at this point, and that's
Yeah.
action without like military component to it. You do military stuff in it. There's other things. Funny enough, and since it meshes with current events, there's a scene in Terminator 2 where they're talking about how Judgment Day, when Judgment Day happens, Skynet launches the nukes at Russia. Russia launches the nukes at the United States in a retaliatory strike. They had to throw in Edward Furlong, John Connor. They had to throw in a line for him because the wall fell during filming of that movie. And so Edward Furlong has one throwaway line that they just had to add to the movie where they say, where he says, well, the Russians, aren't they our friends now? I thought they were our friends now, or something like that. So it's just kind of funny how here we are,
Oh shit.
32 years later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I want to talk about that for a second, man.
sure.
So like Russia's big, bro.
Mm-hmm.
You can already tell with an opening line like that, like how absolutely ignorant I am to geopolitics. But
Sure.
Russia's a big landmass. And I know that a lot of it isn't like heavily, densely populated, especially like Siberia, shit like that. But that being said, there's a lot of reports about, Putin, like they got beaten Ukraine and like they couldn't, take it, and like they're running out of equipment and this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't buy any of that shit for a second.
Oh yeah, that's total bullshit.
Right? Has to
Yeah,
be, right?
there's a fucked up meme that's like, it's this guy and he's smiling, he's grinning like crazy, and the caption is the look on Stalin's face when he realizes he has more men than the Germans have bullets. But I mean that's the truth of it, is
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
can do this war of attrition thing and they will outlast Ukraine just simply because they have more people.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is a huge landmass, but like, I mean, it's kind of like a lot of the big libertarian podcasts talk about or whatever. I mean, Russia's got a GDP that's the size of like, I mean, pick a small European country, Italy, Spain, something like that. I mean, like when people think of Russia, they think of like the European part of Russia, like St. Petersburg and Moscow and stuff like that. But like most of the country is in Asia. And it's a huge country that's very sparsely populated, but they've still got way more people than Ukraine does.
Yeah.
But like the idea of, just to counter the NATO, US propaganda, globalist propaganda here for a second, the idea that like Russia is any threat to like, control the entire world is a joke. I mean, it's just so like we're $30 trillion in debt. The United States is, playing the world empire. And we think that a country that's like, got basically the GDP of Florida or something like that is going to take over the fucking world. And it's the same thing with China too. China is not a threat to take over, the world or anything like that. And that's not to say that I think that Ukraine should have been invaded. And that's not to say that I think Taiwan, which it looks like is probably about to get invaded, like, I don't think that they should be invaded either. I'm a libertarian. I'm an anarchist. I don't believe that these governments should even exist in the first place. I think that the only borders that should exist should be privatized and all that sort of stuff. And I've got biblical reasons for that one too, to an extent. But yeah, I mean, the idea that Russia's being beaten, or that they, first of all, I don't recall Russia ever having a moment like they did with, Dick Cheney and the Iraqis, where they said, "Oh, we're just going to roll right through Iraq. We'll be in there for like a week or two, and then, whatever." Like, I don't think Putin ever said that about Ukraine or anything like that.
Right.
I think the only thing I've really heard that one I kind of cheer on is this idea of like denazifying Ukraine. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah, Nazis suck still,
for
and
sure.
the ones that are in Ukraine, the Azov battalions, the ones that the Obama funded and Trump armed, um, they're actually the direct descendants of Nazis, like the ones that invaded the region back during World War II.
Bro, like I
So,
watched I don't know how up you are on your World War II history. I love that shit. And like I'm not a historian by any means, but I do know that Ukrainians like rolled over hard
mhm.
for the
Oh
Nazis
yeah.
and like did absolutely horrific shit to their own countrymen. I'm talking their neighbors,
Hmm.
just because they were given authority by the Nazis. They were like, hey, listen, you need to round these people up. And dude, I mean, it's fucked up. The documentaries that I've seen, like there's been a couple of times that they've actually interviewed, or these were obviously years ago, but they
Right.
interviewed living people who actually murdered their countrymen on behalf of the Nazis.
Yeah.
They weren't tried. They
No.
were just like I don't know,
Yeah.
man. Like
Yeah.
it's a
It's a fucked up situation.
yeah,
Ukraine is
dude.
a fucked up country. And look, this isn't to say that every Ukrainian's a freaking Nazi. I mean, that's bullshit. That's like
Right.
I think people have gotten so used into this sort of like binary thinking where there aren't like multiple shades of gray and stuff like that. Like, yeah, most Ukrainians are not fucking Nazis. However, there are actually groups of Nazis in Ukraine. And if those people are if that people group is at war with Russia and they get taken out by Russian troops, like, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I do think like any loss of human life is tragic, of course, but like I don't know. I mean, they're Nazis.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, maybe they shouldn't be Nazis, in the year 2022. Who knows? They might get
Oh
canceled or
shit.
something like that.
Yeah, man.
So but Putin's an asshole for invading Ukraine, and
Without a doubt.
yeah, Ukraine's there are some Ukrainians out there that are assholes for, I mean, I guess they've got a long, rich history of selling out their country, because Ukraine is probably easily the most corrupt country in all of Europe. And that's why our government was able to use it as a staging ground to money launder all kinds of stuff for not just Biden, but like, I mean, people on both sides of the political aisle, I'm sure, Republicans, Democrats, like the the duopoly, the uniparty, whatever you want to call it. I mean, like all of them are, that they've used that as a place to do it. And now it's become a money laundering scheme for all the defense contractors and everything, because all the money that they talk about that's going to Ukraine to free Ukraine and make it to keep it protect its democracy. That's all going straight to like, Boeing and Lockheed and all the other defense contractors and shit. I mean, like, and then as soon as it lands on the ground, Russia blows it up because there's no way to actually bring it in country in a way that's like safe and sustainable.
Yeah, man.
So,
And like I don't know if you recall, but right before this all started to kind of pop off, Boeing was on a nosedive. Like it was
mhm,
not good. They had some really bad press that was happening. They started to have I think it was their Supermax 737. One of those
yeah.
was like falling out of the sky, and they kept covering it up and kept those planes in the air, and like people died, man, as a result of like that.
Uh,
That was starting to gain some traction, and then all of a sudden, Ukraine pops off, and that stuff isn't in the papers anymore. We're not hearing about that. And
yeah,
I'm
that's because
not,
they have a blank check from the U.S.
yeah,
taxpayer.
dude, like they're golden now.
Oh yeah.
I
I
don't
mean,
know,
they own how many politicians? Like, like,
all of
hey,
them.
start a war, start talking trash about Russia.
Yeah,
Send some CIA agents out there to help them, like, give intel to the Ukrainians and stuff.
yeah.
So, I mean, the whole thing's a fucking mess.
What do you make of this shit happening in China today? Did you hear about that?
I haven't. I'm not the most up to date on China. The last thing I was really paying attention to was Nancy Pelosi's trip out to Taiwan, and I was kind of hoping she would just stay there, but they didn't want her either, so they sent her back. Um,
Damn it.
There's one last thing I do want to talk about that is terrifying to me
Okay.
because of regarding Russia, which is the latest statement by Putin about we will use any and all means to defend the integrity of Russia, motherland, blah 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 blah, which
Yeah.
means nuclear, and that's the implied threat behind it. And as somebody that grew up, you know, thinking about, I mean, like seriously, I wrote a book, and in a fictional story, what's the major threat? It's the fact that nuclear, that's been hamstrung by regulatory hurdles, like kills us all, and like Terminator 2 was my favorite movie as a child, and that's a nuclear apocalypse thing. And Fallout's my favorite game, and the Metal Gear Solid. So all this stuff that we've mentioned and talked about with nuclear, maybe you should name the episode something to do with that. But the idea of another country that has the second most nuclear weapons in the world, threatening NATO with that terrifies the fuck out of me.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something to legitimately be afraid of. And I think that, anyone that listens to this, if somebody happens to, know anyone that has any sort of say so whatsoever, which, of course is unlikely, but you never know. I hope it doesn't fall on deaf ears. Like, we should not be, the United States as a country. First of all, NATO shouldn't even exist. Okay. It just shouldn't. It shouldn't have existed after the Berlin Wall fell. But for anyone that's listening, this is me doing my part or whatever. We have no business poking the bear of a country that has the second most nuclear weapons in the world. We just don't have any business doing that whatsoever. Yeah. And for a libertarian podcast, you want to talk about the non-aggression principle here for a second. Yeah. I don't think, as much as I believe in private ownership of any and all weapons for the most part, nuclear is one thing that I don't necessarily think that governments, let alone even private individuals, should actually use. It violates, and I think it was Milton Friedman that came up with this, nuclear violates the non-aggression principle simply because there's no way to actually use one of those weapons without harming or aggressing upon people that have no dog in whatever fight you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
nuclear kills innocent people anytime it gets used. It's only been used twice. Messed up story about that one. Nagasaki was an all Christian. Yeah. So this is something. There's a podcast I listened to called the Anarcho Christian Podcast, and they actually had an episode. I think they either rebroadcasted it for the anniversary of Nagasaki, which was in August, or I'd listened to the original. I'm working my way back through all their episodes, but the Nagasaki bomb was dropped by an all-Christian flight crew. And it was dropped on a Sunday morning on Nagasaki, which had the highest population of Christians in the entire Japanese empire. Okay?
Bro.
And there were two targets that they could have picked in the city of Nagasaki. One of them was a naval shipyard or something like that, because, back then they had to actually look at the ground to measure where they were dropping targets. That's how they measured where they would drop the bomb. The other target was the biggest church in all of Japan. So an all-Christian flight crew dropped the second nuclear bomb in history above a church on Sunday morning while it was in service with the biggest population of Christians in the entire country. Like,
that's fucked.
It's completely fucked, and these are the things that you got to sit there and really think about that for a minute. But like, that's, nationalism for anyone out there that's like agnostic or atheist, or like, you've got some serious resentments against Christianity or something like that. I would invite you to take a look at what Christianity actually looks like when it's not completely co-opted by the state. And I would argue that a lot of Christianity from the 20th century, starting around World War I, especially. I mean, it's been co-opted by states for centuries over the course of history. But like, if you look at how Christianity has been like influenced over the centuries by various governments of history. It's incredibly disgusting, so as a spiritual path, as a religion or something like that, it truly is a beautiful um relationship with a higher power. In my humble opinion, I'm a Christian. I make no, apologies for it or anything like that. um but some of the most atrocious things in history have happened in the name of Christianity, and it's usually when a state actor of some kind gets a hold of it, and then it's used to justify some awful atrocity.
Yeah.
So anyways, but on to China here for a second. I did get a kick of let's make everything really heavy, suck all the air out of the room, and then just move on. So you mentioned China. I think there was something recently that I heard about where President Biden, he was interviewed and he said we would absolutely come to Taiwan's defense.
Yeah.
And then they had to issue a statement, like the White House issued a statement saying like that is not the official policy of the US government. Like, so I just get a kick out of the fact that the commander in chief of the country says something, and then like, his own government's just like, oh, but he's got dementia. Don't listen to him. He's not serious. But they have to pretend he actually is serious and that he doesn't have dementia. So it's just ridiculous. The whole thing's a reality show. You tell me, what's the latest scoop on China and Taiwan?
So there is a rumor circulating currently that Chinese President, what is it, Xi Jinping is under house arrest, and he has been ousted.
Really?
They're saying, I mean, there nothing confirmed. There's no major news outlets that are reporting on this. There's been a lot of chatter for the last 16 hours about like 6,000 domestic flights were canceled, and the entirety of the high-speed rail system have been suspended in China, in or around Beijing. So, and it seems to be like everybody looking at the flight maps and shit. Yeah, there's like almost no flights coming in or out of Beijing. So that's something interesting, in terms of what we were talking about, kind of like nuclear cataclysm. So the downside, to something like that would be, one world government taking a step closer, because guaranteed, if that were happening, that is 100%, US led or something, CIA,
NATO, something like that.
Yeah. So we would at least forego the nuclear threat. So, I mean, it's kind of a catch-22. Whether or not it's even true, nobody knows. I haven't seen anything confirmed or denied from an official capacity. So,
is this coming out of the corporate press, or is this like
this is
Jones
just
or something, or what?
No, this is just a bunch of Twitter accounts, man. A bunch of people are talking about it currently.
So the corporate press hasn't mentioned anything about this at all. CNN, Fox, any of this stuff.
Correct. The most official account that I've seen tweet something about it is Wall Street Silver, and it's like the Wall Street Bets, subreddit, kind of Twitter account. But they said
the GameStop guys.
Yeah, those guys. Said Beijing cancels over 6,000 domestic international flights and suspends rail service. Reasons not known yet.
I'm gonna have to look into this. I'm not on the up and up on it. Again, I get a lot of my news from the Ron Paul Liberty Report. They were just covering some other stuff over the past week. I'm sure this will come up on Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
But that's pretty crazy. So my thinking immediately is right along the same, parallel. There are people within China's government probably that do have ties to the World Economic Forum, and it was made very profitable for them to put him under house arrest if any of that stuff is true. Because he's on the, he was on the verge of invading Taiwan, and that would upset the global order. China doesn't need to invade Taiwan if Taiwan and China are both on the same side of, the globalists, basically.
Yep.
So one way to do that, and China's got a weird way of just disappearing people. The Chinese government is incredibly creepy. There was the president of Wayfair, or not Wayfair. Crap, what was it called? Alibaba. Alibaba,
Yeah,
which
that
was their
billionaire
version
guy.
of, yeah, that guy. Like they just disappeared that dude.
Yeah.
Like he
Straight
just
up
gone.
gone.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so like that's kind of frightening. I'm gonna have to look into that some more.
Fuck
And
yeah, man. How could you have that much money and not have protection from your own government?
well, I mean,
I mean, I know.
governments are,
Yeah.
that's what they are. They're a monopoly on force. They're a monopoly on violence. So even if you're the person in the country that has a monopoly on profit or cash or whatever it is, if somebody else wants it and they've got a monopoly on force, guess what they're going to do? They're going to take it.
Yeah. And it really is almost like that, the concept that, you know, mafioso types all flock to government positions
Oh
because
yeah, without a doubt.
I mean, there is no doubt in my mind anymore that that is 100% the case.
I mean, it is a group of people, that are they consolidate power. Like that's what their soul. Like if you read, Rothbard's Anatomy of the State. I mean, that's what they do is they just consolidate power.
Yeah.
They have perceived legitimacy, and they have a monopoly on violence, and so it attracts all kinds of sociopaths and psychopaths and other miscreants and stuff like that. I mean, it attracts the worst of the worst. Um, Recovery has taught me this. I am in charge of two things. I'm in charge of my attitude and I'm in charge of my actions. These are people that don't believe that. These are people that believe that they can control everyone and everything. Not all of them. Most people in the government are, I believe, well intentioned. I think some of them are easily manipulated. I think most people are fairly easily manipulated, which is why we're in the blue pill scenario that we're in with a lot of people. And trying to wake them up and get them to take the red pill and get them to see things for how they are is like a very difficult task. But I think that the promise of getting free stuff and like having your needs met and taken care of. I mean, that's very appealing.
Yeah.
Like, and this is the interesting thing about it. And I was having this conversation with my wife, who's not a libertarian at all. And we love each other and respect each other and everything like that. And she knows that this is something that's very much at the core of my being. But crap, where was I going with that? I had something. I was talking with her yesterday or 2 days ago about this. And it's like, with libertarians versus socialists, for example, libertarians and like socialists tend to agree on what a lot of the problems are. We just disagree on most of the solutions.
Yeah.
Our solutions tend to be based on free market, lack of government intervention, whereas their solutions think like, okay, this government is like, and these big corporations are clearly like super corrupt. So we need a bigger government to be able to like police itself. Like, and it doesn't work. It's absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is why I think that philosophy of everybody. I think leadership. Like we, I talk about this in the 12 strides and in the book, and I think that it's definitely a core tenet of recovery. Leadership is about service. Could you imagine if all of the people in political power in our country thought of, governance the same way the local chairperson or the local lead at your 12-step meeting thinks of leadership? Like, could you imagine that if like they had a devotion to service purely for the spirit of service and like helping their fellow man? And I think a lot of people have been propagandized to believe that that's what government actually is, and that it really is much more noble than than the reality.
Right.
But could you imagine if all of these people, all these elected officials and everything like that actually believed in the tenets of service? Could you imagine if they actually believed in their oaths of office? I mean, like, hey, I'm an ANCAP or whatever, but quite frankly, if we land on like Min Capistan or classical Libistan or whatever you want to call it, like I mean, like I'm that's much better than where we are today. So yeah, but yeah, China's government is creepy as fuck, and that just terrifies me what you just said. But who knows? Maybe that means Taiwan won't get invaded.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I mean, far be it for me to be able to call it.
Mhm.
But I just the world government, either group. I mean, either which way, it's all a bunch of assholes, right? Like
Sure.
the current president of China, he's a piece of shit. I mean, but the people who would be taking over for him are a piece. It's the upper echelons of society that don't know about you or me or care about you or me, all vying for that power seat. And so, yeah, the very best possibility for any of us is that they play cloak and dagger so much that they actually, exterminate each other. But that's we would never be so lucky. There's always going to be one jackass that stays on top.
Dear God, if only it was just
Yeah,
if they
dude.
could all just take each other out without taking out the rest of us that are
If they
just
had
trying to like.
like one of those big eyes wide shut type parties and like all got together and then somebody spiked the punch bowl with, fucking cyanide and then they go out like remember what was that cult out there in California that wore the Keds? Oh fuck, man.
Were they the ones with there's the comet and they
Yeah,
were
Haley Bob Comet.
Hail Bop Comet or whatever? Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, man. Heaven's
Yep.
Gate. Heaven's
Heaven's
Gate.
Gate. Hmm.
If they could go out Heaven's Gate style, that I mean, just imagine how the rest of us would be.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
I
Mm.
think that your average person, which I do still think to in some ways, you or I is quote unquote the average person, even though we're libertarians, even though we are kind of red pilled to a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
um, wants to be able to care for their family. The average person wants to be able to work a job that they have somewhat, they feel is satisfying to some extent, and wants to be able to like be of service and like help other people. Like I think that those are like healthy, normal things that people actually want in their day-to-day lives. They want to be fulfilled. Like if you ever, Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs pyramid, I think most people out there, normal people, want to reach self-actualization by the end of their life, where they can look back on their life and say, I lived a full and complete life. I was an important part of my community. I was able to, people didn't have bad things to say about me. I was able to help others. I was able to, I really got out there and got to experience everything. And like, I am completely satisfied with the way my life turned out. Like, I think most people want self-actualization like that. And I think that's absolutely attainable for the majority of people. But like, it's not easy. I don't think it's possible for people to get there, so long as they continue to be like brainwashed and propagandized into, believing the multitude of all this other crap that seems to be going on. I think people they're being led astray down a very dark path, and they don't really realize what it is that is going on with that. And I think people fall into patterns much the same way that addicts and alcoholics do with that sort of stuff. And so, what ends up happening with family systems and stuff like that, people start hating each other, and like you have siblings and parents and kids that never end up talking with each other again because they have different political beliefs and like, all this, other stuff. And like, I think a lot of that's very deliberate, families splitting up intentionally to, um, just sort of destroy communities and cultures and stuff like that. Like I think some of that's very much deliberate.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
anyways, I mean that's neither here nor there necessarily. I mean, um, I'll put it to you this way: I love my parents. I don't want my kid or, future kids growing up in the same kind of household that I grew up in.
Yeah.
For being a first generation American, it was a lot of East meets West stuff. I was a totally rugged individualist growing up. My family is very much collectivist. And there was a lot of those two things weren't necessarily problems. The problem was the conflict that arose out of that and how the families how my family pretty much dealt with it. In my family, we didn't really talk about it or anything like that. And the reality is this: all family systems are dysfunctional. They're all dysfunctional. The level of dysfunction solely depends on the level of transparency family members are willing to have with each other, and if they're willing to work on what their issues are. And
Yeah.
if they're not willing to work on that stuff, then whatever. I mean, but then again, I've got a 9-month-old, so what the hell do I know?
Yeah. I mean,
I'll get back to you in 13 years.
well, I mean, and I don't think any of us ever have all the answers, man. I mean, I think that's kind of like the plight of humanity, is that we do the best we can with the information that we've been able to take in our lifetimes. But I mean, you can live to 100 years old and you still won't have it all figured out. And you still won't think exactly the way that your parents thought or anybody else thought. You'll just have your own experience. And I think, and I'm going to get kind of like, philosophical here with it, but I think that understanding that and being able to have that well equipped in your mind and approach your day with that logic and being able to afford other people the same, we could avoid a lot of the issues that we fall into as a society. I mean, you look on both the socially left and socially right, people, if they would just allow the grace for somebody else to just live their life the way that they, see fit, we would eliminate a lot of these issues,
Mhm.
and I think that they would, so long as they understood that, okay, that person has had life experiences that have led them to where they're at. What they are doing, they believe is right.
Sure. Mhm.
Where that starts to get fucked up is whenever children get involved, right? And
Mhm.
I'm really getting off the fucking deep end here, and I don't know if I should or not. I'm not going to. I'm not going to go too far, but I'm just going to say, when you bring kids into your radical ideology, you and I both probably know what that means. We've seen it.
Mhm.
It's not
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
It's not fucking good. It's not fucking okay. Let kids be kids. You know
Sure.
what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I'm with you there, I guess, you know, child abuse is still child abuse these days. It's
Yeah.
interesting. If you go back, I was thinking about this, and this is funny. So I think we did address some of the messaging of the certain state affiliates in the LP and everything earlier today or whatever. It's like, if you go back 10, 15 years, if you wanted to call somebody something that no one would ever rise up to their defense, you would call them a pedophile, right?
Yeah.
And regardless of whether or not that was true, no one was ever going to rise up and uh to that person's defense. Now that is something that we're starting to see become defensible to some extent by certain groups of the world. And what are those groups of the world calling people? Racists, homophobes, transphobes, ableists. So a lot of this culture war stuff is and now it's like, if you're called that thing, you are silenced. No one is going to rise to your defense. Like if you're, being called a racist or something like that, and I mean, truth be told, like actual racists, hey, I kind of agree with that. I think the idea of, racism is disgusting,
Yeah.
and any of these other comments about discriminating against people for whatever reason. I mean, my thing is, go live your life and do whatever you want. Just don't force it on me and don't do anything that's hurting other people, of
For
course.
sure.
Doesn't necessarily mean I agree with you or your lifestyle or anything like that. It just means that I I don't think you should. I don't think that you should be like taken out by the freaking mob, of people with their pitchforks and torches just because like you live differently in some way or some form or fashion, whether it's something that you can or can't control.
Yeah,
You know. So, anyways, that's kind of my 2 cents.
for sure, man.
But kids are vulnerable. Like, and this is something that's come up recently. And like, when I think 19 is the most dangerous age of anyone's life. Like you've been an
Yeah,
adult for
for
a year and you
sure.
actually think you know something when you don't.
Yes.
My best friend died of an overdose when we were 19 years old, and I've had some interesting realizations about that. There's some of that in the book, by the way, too. If you get to the some of the strides that deal with taking inventory and doing amends and stuff like that, I talk about some of that, but and how I dealt with making amends to somebody who had passed away. But 19 is the most dangerous age, I think. And like the human brain isn't even like fully formed until like 25. So I don't know where anybody gets this idea. It's like, okay, well, all teenagers are dumbasses, but at the same time, for the kids, let's like let the kids like do whatever it is that we think that they should do. And like this extends to like the David Hogg types talking about gun control. It's like, okay, so we readily admit that like kids are fucking morons. Teenagers
Yeah.
are morons. They don't know shit. They've got their heads up their ass. But let's like listen to the teenagers about how like, climate change and gun control and like a variety of other cultural social issues that guess what, 10 years from now, when they're not corporate sponsored, no one's going to care about and they're going to forget about it. Like a lot of this stuff, the white hot culture war stuff going on in the United States and around the world and has become our second biggest export besides the US petrodollar. That stuff is going to fizzle out sooner or later. And I think that not a lot of people are from around the world just really aren't buying that shit. But whatever, to each their own. I mean, it's not something that I want, uh, you know, necessarily in my family. And like, I don't know, we'll see. My wife doesn't necessarily agree with me all the time about that, but how many people again are just, this is just in general. This isn't even pertaining to my family specifically, but how many people out there disagree with stuff and they're just scared to speak up because they don't want to be ostracized or shamed or
Yeah.
whatever, and so people are just silenced by not saying anything. I have tons of stuff that I want to say all the time that I never say, because of
Fucking
that. So
same, bro. Same.
yeah, I mean, like,
And you and I, so like we are in the unique position to
yeah,
work in a field that demands political correctness at every given moment.
this is true.
And so we are in that unique position of having to really examine the shit we're going to say in our head before it passes our lips.
Well, I don't know if I've ever told you about this, and some people might think I'm joking when I say this, but when the other staff isn't looking, I teach all the good addicts Austrian economics.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
I'm not kidding. I actually just recently had one of them just got a copy of Anatomy of the State, and another one got Henry Hazlitt. Gosh, what's that movie? Everyone, the book everyone recommends, Economics in One Lesson or whatever.
Yes.
So like, whenever we're doing quote unquote personal finance group for recovery, I end up throwing in a bunch of Austrian economics in there, and no one knows the difference because realistically, it's like if you actually live your life based on that and you like treat your personal finance like that way, then guess what, you actually do end up like saving a lot of money and being very good with money and like having stuff for a rainy day instead of like living paycheck to paycheck like they want the majority of America to live, basically. So
Yeah, man.
I teach them stuff like financial responsibility and all that.
Fuck yeah. Well, man, listen, what else did you cover what you wanted to cover? Is there anything else?
I have one final thing that I would like to say and
Okay.
talk about. couple of things really, really quick. So about the book, 12 Strides and 12 Norms for Liberty and Recovery. Again, it's available on Amazon. You can get an e-reader version. I think if you've got Prime, you might be able to get it for free. If not, you can get a paperback copy. Uh, I started writing the sequel. And, it's just going to be a sequel to the fictional story that's the last third of the book. Um, it's the last story. The story in the book was A Farewell to the State. The sequel will be called Postmortem of the State. So I'm doing a Rothbard theme there. Need to come up with a name for the third book because I am planning on writing a third book. I don't think I can cover everything I want to cover, but I started writing earlier this week, and I don't know who's going to publish it or where it's going to be published. So if you're listening to this and you have a libertarian publishing company and you're interested, I'm in the market for it. If somebody from Champion Books happens to be reading this, please, 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 please get a hold of me. And that way we can talk about maybe doing a second edition of the first book and correcting all the typos and the missing page numbers and all the other stuff. I mean, the content and subject matter in there is good, but, I don't know. I would love to hear from my publishing company. I kind of wish it hadn't come down to, after months and months and months, I wish it hadn't come down to me talking about it on a podcast very publicly like this. But, I haven't been able to get anyone.
It's a dog shit move on their part. I'll say that, dude. Like, that's not okay. That's
yeah.
Not okay.
I mean, and here's my attitude on it. It's like, I'm trying to be just humble. Like, I'm a guy who's never written a book before, and I wrote a book for the first time. And, I remember throughout the writing process, like I reached out to you and I was like, who do you know? Who can you put me in touch with to try to do this? I don't know anything about writing a book. And, like we tried reaching out to Scott Horton and, Spike Cohen and like a few other people and everything like that. And it's like, if there's anyone that's out there listening to this and you're looking for a guy who is not a professional writer, but is pretty good at wordsmithing and knows a thing or two about, the subject matter that he's writing about, like, hey, I am interested in doing further publishing at some point. And if anyone out there with Being Libertarian or Champion Books is listening to this, please get in touch with me ASAP so we can like rectify this. And I will come up with Drew and do another episode talking about, hey, somebody finally got in touch with me and maybe there was just a misunderstanding somehow or whatever. Yeah. And, I will clear the air on that. Make good by your promise and the contract that we signed would be my thing, and hey, we're libertarians. We're real big on contracts, and so when I signed my name to the dotted line for a company that was, libertarian, quote unquote, whatever the hell that means to them, I guess, like I'm thinking like, okay, this is better than me just going the Amazon publishing route because I am helping the cause. I'm helping other libertarians that are running a small business and trying to get a message of liberty out there and da 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 da. Like there were other places I could have gone to. I chose to go with a place that was pro-libertarian, and I will do it again in a heartbeat, either for Champion Books or whoever else it is. But somebody could champion, please get a hold of me again.
Yeah. You've got to actually do what you say you're going to do. You know what I mean?
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Hey, read the book. I put it in the book, actually, be consistent,
Yeah.
But, yeah. And I guess the one last thing that I would close out on is just simply this. If any of your audience is new to recovery and you're struggling and everything, recovery is possible. Quitting drinking and drugging is just the foundation. And then, the recovery process, the 12 steps or the 12 strides, if you want to read my book and use that to help you. I mean, I definitely recommend the AA Big Book or the NA Basic Text, or hell, even Marijuana Anonymous. They have a book called Life with Hope that's absolutely amazing. It was written by a bunch of stoners with PhDs. Use that 12-step literature and the fellowship to get sober. Get yourself a sponsor and work the steps with them and try to be a service and help others. Practice what I try to preach here. But I wrote a book that combines libertarian and 12-step philosophy. So if none of that other stuff is working for you, maybe my book will. Maybe it'll help save some lives. I don't know.
For
So
sure,
that's
man.
why I wrote it.
Heck yeah. Well, man, I love you to death, brother. You're
I
good
love you
people.
too, Drew.
You've got a beautiful family. You're doing big things, and you're absolutely somebody that I am so glad that we crossed paths, man. And I know I'm not putting out a whole lot of content right now, but fucking anytime you need to come on, man, just holler.
Yeah. Thank you, Drew. I love you, man. I really do appreciate that. And I know that we'll talk very soon.
For sure, man. All right. Have a good one.
You too. Good night.
All right, there you go. Thanks a lot, Ash, for coming on. Thank you guys for listening. Check the show notes because I'll have a link for the book, in the show notes. I mean, the money will hopefully get to him eventually for the book, and the man could absolutely use it. He's a new father. He's doing great things, mighty things in his own neck of the woods, but a few extra bucks goes a long way, especially when you got a young family that you're trying to look after. So absolutely check it out. And follow up with them. And anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I love each and every one of you. I hope that you're out there and you're staying safe and you're just finding that thing that you're passionate about in your life. I do want to also plug something real quick. So, I have been on this weight loss transformation journey, and my damn dogs are being assholes, but forgive me. But so I've been probably since I got real serious when we got back from the national convention, and I've really dug my heels in, and I've made it a habit at this point. Like every morning I'm waking up at 4 a.m., going to the gym, or I'm walking, doing some cardio and, eating right. I'll cut loose on the weekends a little bit, but, I'm still being mindful of the food that I'm putting into my body and the output of, from the calories I put in and the calories I burn. But there is one person, and you guys know him, Jake Howard. He's been on the show. Jake is a fitness coach by trade. Like, the man is wonderful. He's approachable. He is so incredibly knowledgeable. And if you are interested in, kind of having somebody, who from a distance can kind of walk you through a diet, walk you through a workout routine. Jake has a Patreon that he set up. I mean, it's all like the top tier is only like $15 a month. This dude has so much information, and it's digestible. I don't know if you're anything like me. You've probably, like, when I started, I didn't know shit about fitness, and what I know is incredibly minute compared to what, I think the majority of gym goers have. But especially in the beginning, I was very, very, intimidated to even go to the free weight section or to do any of the things that other people like seemingly felt comfortable doing in a gym. So having somebody who can kind of guide you and field some of those insane goddamn questions that we get in our head whenever we're first starting out is a massive thing. And at $15 a month, I mean, my God, you want to talk about the deal of the century? Like, absolutely go check them out. It's at HakeJoward, at Hake Joward on Twitter. And, he's got all of his links for his Patreon, and he's just a good dude, man. And that's another part of my extended recovery family. And I don't know, man. It's I got a lot of respect and admiration for him because he's really gotten me through some fucking tough times with this deal. But at this point, I feel like it's a habit, like I've kind of carved out a new lifestyle for me. The trick will be to carry this into the winter months. But I believe I'll do it. And so, yeah, anyways, guys, please go check them out, give them a like, and we'll roll right into the song of the day. And I've played this song before. I know I have. This is Jesse Stewart. And I'd also talked on the show about how, Jesse overdosed and died, some time back. But, given the work that I'm doing, I don't know. I felt like playing it again. And especially because, like, As of right now, when I'm recording this, there is not another podcast interview scheduled. It won't stay that way. We will get another one in there, but it's just, it's just not there right now. And that's okay. But I don't know, man. I like this song. I wanted you guys to hear it again. So, anyways, I love you. Stay safe out there. Be good to yourselves. Be good to your neighbor. And go out there and make your community 1% better. I don't care how you do it. Just make it 1% better. Let's all do that. All right, guys. We will see you soon. I promise.
Out here I can barely see my breath. I'm surrounded by jealousy and death, and I can't be reached. I only have one call, dragged underneath, separate from you all. Last time I lost my own turn, in spite of every goddamn thing I learned, I hid my tracks and I spit out all my air. I slipped into cracks, stripped of all my cares, all my cares, all my cares. I am so tired